Today, let's start with a simple question. How do filmmakers create fear? Is it through dialogue?
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
Is it through editing or the camera? Or is it music? Alfred Hitchcock believed it wasn't any of these by itself. What mattered was how long he could make the audience wait.
Alfred Hitchcock once claimed that he could make an audience scream by simply showing them a bomb under the table and making them wait. He is widely regarded as the master of suspense, and honestly, once you watch his films, it's hard to argue with that title. What's interesting is that Hitchcock didn't rely on graphic violence, on jump scares. Instead, he figured out how to make audience uncomfortable using patience, anticipation, and a little bit of psychological torture. Hitchcock famously said that fear doesn't come from what you show, but what you make the audience wait for. He understood that suspense lives in that awkward, nerve-wracking pause where something might happen, but hasn't yet. And Hitchcock really loved making people sit in that feeling. Psycho is our main case study because it completely changed how horror and thrillers worked. But Hitchcock didn't suddenly wake up one day and invent that suspense. By briefly looking at Rear Window, Vertigo, The Birds, and Strangers on a Train, we can see how he keeps using the same strategies across different films and genres.
Why do some movie moments make us jump, while others keep us on edge for minutes? That difference is at the heart of how Alfred Hitchcock understood fear. He believed that movies scare us in very two different ways. He was very clear about the difference between them. Surprise is instant. Something sudden happens, the audience reacts, and then it's over. A classic jump scare would work like this. It shocks you, but only for a moment. Suspense, on the other hand, is what happens when the audience knows something bad is coming and is forced to wait for it. According to Hitchcock, that waiting, that anticipation is what really makes people uncomfortable. In Psycho, Hitchcock carefully controls what the audience knows at every stage. For the large part of the film, we are led to believe that Marion Crane is the main character. We follow her, understand her choices, and naturally assume she will survive, because that's how movies usually work. And then Hitchcock kills her halfway through the film. The moment is shocking, but it only works because suspense has already been built. Long before the shower scene, the audience senses that something is wrong. The mortal feels off, Norman feels uneasy, nothing terrible has happened yet. But we are already tense. Hitchcock often gives audience more information than the characters, which makes the waiting even worse. In Strangers on a Train, we know about the murder plan long before the police do, so every ordinary conversation feels dangerous. In Vertigo, the suspense is more emotional. We are not waiting for violence, but for the truth to slowly unravel. The audience isn't just reacting, we are thinking, predicting, and stressing the entire time. And honestly, that's what makes it so effective.
Have you ever felt slightly uncomfortable while watching a Hitchcock movie? Well, that's basically the main point of his whole work. Point of view shots are a huge part of how Hitchcock creates suspense because they force the audience to see the world through a character's eyes, and sometimes that character is kind of creepy. In Psycho, Hitchcock often places the camera in positions that suggest spying or watching. The most obvious example is when Norman Bates watches Marion through the peephole. The camera literally takes his place, meaning the audience is now watching her with him. It's uncomfortable, and that's very much the point. This technique turns the audience into participants instead of observers. We're not just watching suspense, we're involved in it. Hitchcock uses this idea even more clearly in Rear Window, where the entire film is built around watching other people. Jeff watches his neighbors, and we watch them too, sharing his curiosity and eventually his guilt. Voyeurism also creates a suspense by limiting information. We only see what the character sees, which means we're never fully sure what's going on. By aligning the camera with the character's gaze, Hitchcock blurs the line between audience and character.
What if the most terrifying moments in cinema was not what you see, but what your mind is forced to imagine? Alfred Hitchcock didn't scare audiences with gore, he scared them with editing. Editing is one of the Hitchcock's most powerful tools, and Psycho's shower scene is the perfect example. Even though people remember it as extremely violent, there's actually very little shown on the screen. No stab wound, no knife going in, just quick cuts and panic. The scene contains over 70 edits in less than a minute. Hitchcock uses rapid montage, fragmented shots, and sharp cuts to create illusion of violence. The viewer's brain fills in the gaps, which somehow makes it feel worse than actually seeing it. The pace of the editing reflects Marion's fear. As the cut becomes quicker, the scene feels more chaotic and intense. Hitchcock believed that by controlling the speed of editing, he could control how the audience feels. Slower pacing creates suspense and anticipation, while faster pacing overwhelms the viewer and releases build-up tension. This idea shows up in other films too. The Strangers on a Train, Hitchcock uses cross-cutting between two actions to stretch suspense and keep the audience anxious about when everything will collide. Through editing, Hitchcock proves that fear does not need to be shown directly. Sometimes the scariest thing is what the audience imagines instead.
What makes Psycho so unsettling isn't just what we see, it's what we hear, or sometimes what we don't hear at all. Sound is another key element in Hitchcock's suspense, and Psycho's music is probably the most famous example. Bernard Herrmann's high-pitched violin screeches during the shower scene are almost impossible to forget, and honestly, even impossible to unhear. Hitchcock also understood the power of silence. Sometimes the absence of sound builds more tension than music ever could. Silence forces the audience to wait, listen, and anticipate danger. This idea is pushed even further in The Birds, where Hitchcock avoids a traditional music score altogether. Instead, everyday sounds, flapping wings, screeching birds become terrifying. Without music telling us how to feel, the fear hits more directly. In Psycho, the sudden shift from silence to violent sound shocks the audience on a psychological level.
When Psycho is viewed alongside Alfred Hitchcock's wider body of work, one conclusion becomes unavoidable: suspense. Suspense is not an effect, it is a system. Hitchcock carefully designs every element of film formed to guide the audience's emotional and psychological response through controlled point of view, precise editing, strategic sound, and withheld information. He turns watching into an active, unsettling experience. What makes Psycho so influential is not what it shows, but what it denies. Hitchcock removes visual certainty and replaces it with anticipation. The audience is left to imagine what happens in the gaps between shots, and that imagined violence carries far more weight than anything shown explicitly. Suspense here is produced through delay, absence, and expectations. This method extends across Hitchcock's film. In Rear Window, Vertigo, The Birds, and Strangers on a Train, suspense is consistently built through restriction of vision, of knowledge, and of resolution. The audience is always positioned slightly ahead, slightly behind, or uncomfortably aligned with the characters on screen. The Hitchcock's continued influence on modern thrillers and psychological horror proves the effectiveness of this approach. His films demand attention, anticipation, and emotional investment. The viewer is no longer passive but psychologically involved. Ultimately, Hitchcock reframes fear as a mental process rather than a visual one. Suspense in his cinema exists not in the event itself but in the moment before it arrives.